So we're delighted to have with us now, and moving on, François Matarasso. François is a passionate advocate of the arts and is recognized as a guru in arts practice, theory and policy. He said to me earlier that guru is a word used by journalists who can't spell charlatan. And I have to tell you that he is not a charlatan. His writing, research and work in community art rests on the belief that everyone has the right to create art and to share the result, as well as to enjoy and participate in the creations of others. His work is recognized internationally through extensive publication, translation and conferences. He has worked in more than 35 countries all over the world. He is a true international voice and don't we need them at this time. So please welcome to the stage, François Matarasso.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you very much to the Arts Council of Wales for inviting me to come and speak to you today. It's an honour, and I'm very grateful as well for the opportunity to get a sense of the discourse that is happening here. I was very impressed by what I've just heard. I have worked in what I still call community arts for 35 years or so, and in many countries, but I'm sorry to say Wales is a country that I still know too little, and I've not so often had the opportunity to discover what's happening here. So it's a particular pleasure for me to be here today. I'd say one of the reasons that I have made my life in this field is because after 35 years I still have more questions about it than I do answers, and it still eludes me, which is one of the reasons, and there are others, but it's one of the reasons that I describe it as a restless art. And some of what I'll do today is try and share some of those questions. Now let me see if this works. No. Okay, let's try again. Okay. Over the time that I have been working in this field, participation has become an incredibly successful idea. It's become so fashionable, so accepted as what the arts should be doing, that it's in danger of becoming a cliche. By which I mean that we might take it for granted and stop asking questions about what it means. I think that would be a pity, because the questions it raises are important and interesting, but it would also be dangerous, because the questions involve not just artistic dilemmas, but ethical and political ones too. Today, I want to explore some of the dilemmas and tensions that make this a restless art for me. I'll begin with a working definition of what I mean by participatory art, because as you saw from the last slide, it trades under an enormous range of names and concepts and theories today. I want to look back and give you a brief and partial history of where we've come from, because I think this is now 50 years old, and it is really important that we understand where this world has come from and where it might be going in consequence. Then I'll talk about some of the different intentions that underpin the work. Why do we do it? Why do different people do it? Why do we have that forest of different words that all signal different people's ideas and purposes behind what they do. And I'll conclude with some questions that I hope might be fruitful in nourishing your further discussion today. Okay, a working definition of participatory art. It's very simple. Participatory art is the creation of an artwork by professional artists and non-professional artists working together. I prefer that very generous, we've already used the word inclusive today, and I will again later, but that inclusive definition, because it is such a big field, it involves so many different kinds of work, that actually anything more precise, I think, runs the risk of creating divisions and barriers that are unhelpful and even dangerous. So this definition of what I'm going to talk about aims to be inclusive. But of course, in being that, it doesn't say anything about quality, about intention, about purpose. Within that very broad field, and I'll come back to this idea that this is a field of practice, there are millions of people working in different ways that need to be understood and valued for themselves, but also need to be seen as different. Now I want to draw your attention to two elements of that definition. The first is a difference of kind, and it's when I speak about the creation of an artwork. Oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. You can't quite see. Oh, you can see it there. Okay. I can't see the heading, and I thought you... Right. The creation of an artwork. For me, that's essential. Unless something is being created, what's happening is not art, but perhaps some kind of education program in art. And that's different. The creation of art requires a distinctive framework of ideas and values, an attempt at finding meaning or making sense. It happens in time. From the very beginning, we've learnt that artwork has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it requires a public presentation. All of those things are part of what make an artwork, and they turn what can be a shared learning experience or activity into something with the autonomous existence of a work of art. Now, the art may be modest, naive, derivative, temporary, may just not be very good. But there is a difference in kind between the worst work of art and the best learning experience. The best learning experience might be preferable to the worst work of art, but they're not the same thing, and you have to understand that. The second key aspect of the definition that I just offered you is the use of the phrase non-professional artists. Throughout my working life, people have used a variety of terms for the people who aren't professional artists in their work. They all seem to me to have problems. And the reason that I speak of professional artists and non-professional artists is because, unlike the last distinction, which is a distinction of kind, this is a distinction of degree. We are all capable of acting as an artist. The act of creating art is open to everyone. Some of us do it very well. Some of us do it all the time. Some of us do it with high levels of training and knowledge and expertise and talent. But all of us can do it. And one of the things that is remarkable about art is that you can do it only once, with none of that training or experience, and make something that is breathtaking because of the originality of your voice and the integrity of your vision. And so, in participatory art, for me, the critical thing is that people are making art together. Some of them are professionals, some of them are not professionals, but there is only a distinction of degree between them, not a distinction of kind. And this image from a performance that I saw last year in a youth prison in Portugal is an example. It's a performance of Don Giovanni, done by not just the prisoners. The commendatore role was sung by the governor of the prison, which was quite remarkable. And seeing him get shot and carted away by the head of the guards was also quite a powerful symbolic moment. But that orchestra is a professional orchestra, and the people singing on stage, who between them played Don Giovanni's servant as a collective performance, were obviously non-professionals. Right, a partial history. For me, there are 3 phases or generations of the development of participatory arts in Britain, and partly also in other countries, but I'm mostly going to talk about Britain in this context because the story is different in other countries. And I divide them into the period of community art, the period of participatory art, and a period that we're now in, that I think we have been in since the financial crash, roughly speaking. It's coincidental, but it's also not coincidental, because it's coincidental in the sense that round about that time a new generation was becoming was taking up the mantle of taking this work forward, but also they were doing it in a fundamentally different context because of the financial crash. And I don't have a name for that third period because it's just happening, but I might call it a restless art. Okay, community arts, that first period, for me it exists between the mid-1960s and the end of the 1980s. It's when the phrase community arts first gets used, and it comes out of the baby boom generation. It comes out of the 3 people that you see there, who are some of the founders of Amber Collective, a remarkable film and photography collective founded in 1968 in Newcastle. They had met in Trent Polytechnic, the first generation to go to art school from working class communities, and found themselves being told by their tutors to turn their backs on the places they had come from, and did not want to do that. They did not want to take a career in the arts if it meant that the working class culture that they themselves had come from had no validity and was of no interest. And that's important because that generation, including the people you see there, some of the other companies like Freeform, Action Space, Greenwich Mural Workshop, with whom I trained at the beginning of the 1980s, made a conscious decision to challenge the art world's orthodoxies and the art world's values. And that was really important because a lot of what followed since has been shaped by that. One of the ways in which the art world reacted in the 1960s and 1970s was to question the quality of what the community arts world was doing. In other words, to delegitimize it as art, because the community arts world was questioning what the art world was doing. So there was set up from the very beginning a confrontation of values that I think is still unresolved. And that runs through all of this work. Who says what's good, and on what basis, and why, really matters here. This is an example of a piece of work from Greenwich Mural Workshop, which, as I said, I trained with in 1981. I did an apprenticeship with Greenwich Mural Workshop. For me, it's kind of emblematic of that period of community arts, partly because the mural itself was an emblematic form. Murals are rarely done except in decorative place-making sense after the end of the 1980s. But during the 1970s and into the 1980s, they were a key part of what the community arts movement was trying to do. And it's worth thinking about this mural in particular for two reasons. One is because the artists who worked on it, Carol Kenner and Steve Lobb, they were visual artists, and they'd come out of Hornsey College of Art. They'd been part of its occupation. They came and wanted to work with communities like this, Charlton in southeast London. They had to invent a way of painting that the community that had no technical skills could do. And they did invent a way of painting that created form by simplifying it into 3 tones. And that became the visual language of Greenwich Mural Workshop. The image itself is important, though, because this was Floyd Road and it was slated for demolition. And the residents and tenants of Floyd Road worked with Greenwich Mural Workshop to represent their resistance to the demolition of their homes and their displacement, which, given all the rhetoric about the discussion around gentrification and the housing problems today, also shows how little some things have changed in the last 40 years. So this is, if you like, a very political visual image. And in fact, Floyd Road did resist demolition and still exists today. But I also show this image because it shows the limitations of this kind of work, or some of this kind of work. The technical demands, the time involved. It took months to make and paint a mural like that. As I found myself later in the 80s working on a mural in Newark-on-Trent, where I was working as a community arts worker. Actually, most people don't want to climb up a scaffolding because it's difficult and they don't feel safe. And so all these very simple practical barriers come in the way of that work, to say nothing of the politics of it. One of the things that's interested me is to see how murals remain a very powerful political form of art. So one of the things that's been very striking, in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, there has been an explosion of murals in the last 3, 4, 5 years as a way to try and make a visual artistic statement about the troubled times that people are going through. And I'll come back to that when I talk about the 3rd generation. The last thing I'll say about this first generation of community arts was that there was a degree of political radicalism, by no means not as universal as is sometimes thought, and it was more complex, but there were community artists who were engaged in that, particularly during the first year, during the first period of the Thatcher government. There was a lot of opposition between some communities and what was happening. So you have groups like Corby Community Arts, for instance, being very much involved in the campaign to save the Corby Steelworks, and many community arts organisations involved in the miners' work around the miners' strike. This image is kind of representative of that. It's from one of Welfare State's famous burning of Parliament events that reached their peak in the mid-80s. And for me it's important because what it says is there was also a rhetorical performative element about a lot of the politics. Some of the politics was very grassroots and very much about, like Greenwich Memorial Workshop helping a group of people to save their street. But a lot of it was quite theatrical and quite performative, not necessarily less valuable for that, but nonetheless different. Now, for me, there is a significant shift in this practice round about the end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s, and it's a shift that is marked by the fact that people stop talking about community arts and start talking about participatory arts. I've written at length about that, and I won't bore you with the theoretical and ideological issues behind that, but there is a sense in which the community arts world seemed to have lost the argument, both not only politically, but also within the art world. A lot of people wanted to get away from the idea of community arts, which seemed to be tainted with a sense of low quality. This argument about what was good art seemed at that point largely to have been won by the people who were the opponents of the community arts world. There's an interesting shift. There's a Bulgarian political scientist called Ivan Krestev who talks about the revolution from Woodstock to Wall Street, and actually he makes a connection between that Woodstock generation of the community arts founders who were challenging authority, whether it was political or artistic, and the growth of individualism that has given us the world that we now have. And participatory arts became focused on individuals. How did individual people benefit or grow through the opportunities, as opposed to how did people collectively or as communities? The work spread far beyond that first community, and this is an image from Bealtaine, which is a wonderful festival of older people in Ireland, founded in 1995. So very much in that second generation, but crucially set up and run by a civil society organisation, Age and Opportunity. In 2016, there were about 120,000 older people who participated in Bealtaine, which is something like 1 in 5 of everyone over 65 in Ireland. It's an extraordinary growth in the meaning and engagement of participatory arts. And that is, for me, emblematic to some degree of the the second generation. But there's another sense in which the participatory arts didn't just spread out away from community arts at that time into civil society. It also was taken up in some ways by the contemporary art world. And this is, and you probably saw this happened this summer. It's an artist called Spencer Tunick, and the piece is called Sea of Hull. And you might wonder why this is participatory arts. It is participatory arts it meets my definition. It's the creation of work of art by professional and non-professional artists working together. But for me, it's right at one end, because one of the things about this work is that actually it doesn't really matter who turned up. So long as 3,000 people turned up, didn't matter which 3,000 people turned up, because their contribution was simply to be there. On the other hand, if you read some of the people who took part in that, it was clearly a profoundly moving and challenging experience for many of them. So it is this spread of ideas about challenging the nature of art and the nature of participation that first emerged in the 1960s and 70s under community arts have now spread into all kinds of other areas. And now, what I think of as the third generation. This is an image from a training that I attended in Morocco. This is a group called Tandem Shamel. They represent arts organisations, some in Europe, but mostly in North Africa, Egypt, Tunisia, Lebanon, some Syrian people no longer in Syria, working on remarkable, extraordinary projects that they told me I learned some of the stories of. This generation is changing what community arts was, what participatory arts has been, and they are doing it in a number of ways. First of all, because it's happening, some of the best work is happening in countries that are under the greatest pressure now. So the work that I've seen that in recent years that has impressed me most has often been in places like Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, in the Balkans, in Ukraine, in Turkey, and in North Africa. And of course the context here is fundamentally different. One of the key aspects of participatory arts was a dialogue between public institutions, sometimes between government and artists, about community development, about what could the arts contribute in the way that the Assembly member had just touched on. But for many of these young people, there is either no state to talk to, or no public institutions to talk to, or they don't have any resources, or they're not trusted. They're not legitimate interlocutors. So the relationship that these organisations and these young artists are having is very different, which means they are changing the nature of this work. It's also very different because they have grown up in a globalising world. This is a group of Tunisian and Italian artists who have done a remarkable theatre project called Lampedusa Mirrors about migration, working with young people who have migrated from North Africa and are now in Italy, and young people who are still in North Africa, about what this experience means. This is a generation that is networked in all kinds of different ways. This is the generation that has been shocked and horrified by some of the political changes that we have seen happen in recent terms, because they don't share that perspective, they don't understand it. This is a generation also that is working with it's a generation that is growing up sometimes in repressive societies. Talking to some artists working in Egypt, it is extraordinary that they have the courage to do some of the things that they are doing, and I have a lot of questions about all of that. Some of the assumptions that I have had, that I developed in my career, which I still believe in some senses, which is that this work is about being able to express yourself, to share your view, to take part in the national conversation, to articulate your values and your sense of meaning, so that you are not only somebody who is spoken about, but that you can represent yourself. Well, those things still seem to me to be absolutely true, but what happens if you're living and working in a country where you can share your view, but nobody cares? That you can exercise your rights on one level, but nothing happens if you do. So it's a hollow exercise of those rights to free speech. And those are some of the challenges that these young people, among others, are facing. When I look back on that 50 years and that development and that, as I say, it's a partial story, partly because it's incomplete, but partly also because I recognise that it is my perspective. It's only one story that you could tell about this. But when I look back on that, I ask myself, did those ideals of the 1960s, did they lead to defeat, or to colonisation, or to subversion? And actually, I think in some ways they led to all three. Some of what that first generation wanted to do ended in defeat, and sometimes rightly. Some of their ideas were wrong or misplaced and naive. Some of their attitudes, the place of women, for instance, in that first generation was often quite marginal, to say the least. So a lot of things have changed in our attitudes to this work. Some of it has ended in colonisation. By that I mean the way in which the art world that the community artists of the 1960s were challenging the values of, some of that art world has actually taken on the methods and ideas and practices through outreach and education work and all kinds of other ways in which participation is used as a concept or a practice. But some of it, I think, has also resulted in a degree of subversion. I think that the confidence with which the art world articulated its authority in 1968 is much less secure 50 years later. And I think that to some extent the art world has had to accommodate itself to some of these values, because actually the world has changed so much around it, and it has changed partly because of the way participatory and community artists have worked, and partly because those artists are working with the grain of an increasing democratization and increasing freedom of speech and increasing presence of diverse voices in our society, that actually some of the positions that the art world held in 1968 are simply no longer defendable, which doesn't mean that some people aren't still trying to defend them. So, let's talk a little bit about intentions. I think that if this is a huge field, it is easier to understand, not in terms of form or practice or culture or even government policy or Arts Council policy. It's best understood by the intention. Why are people trying to do it? And for me, there are three broad intentions, which I'll touch on briefly now, that people are trying to achieve through this work. The first and the oldest is what I would call cultural democratization. The idea that actually is rooted in the welfare state, that everybody should have access to culture. And this is an image from a wonderful project by the Philharmonie de Paris, one of countless classical music projects across the world that are intended to give young people from disadvantaged backgrounds the opportunity to learn, to play, to discover classical music. Now, and this is part of where some of these tensions come in. In lots of ways, this seems to me to be splendid and wonderful. And who would be against saying against the idea that young people should not have access to this kind of work? There is heaps of fantastic work happening in this logic of extending access to the arts. Its difficulty for me, though, is that it struggles not to become a missionary enterprise that is essentially about teaching people to like a particular thing. And implicit in that is, however nicely it's avoided, is the idea that what they already like is somehow less good than this thing that they're being given. And also implicit in that is that where they are is not good enough. It's always about where they're going to be, what they're going to like, how good they're going to be at this. That is problematic, but at the same time, I'm absolutely not saying that the answer is not to offer that access. It's just one of the tensions that we have to live with and be conscious of. And I'll now I'll keep coming back to this sense of being conscious. The second change, the second intention that has characterized all this work is an intention to bring about social change. And actually, some of the most exciting and powerful work in this sense wasn't even in Europe. It was already happening in the 50s and 60s in the global south, in countries that were rebuilding themselves in a post-colonial context, which is why some of the powerful voices and ideas have come from places like Brazil with Augusto Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed. There is today still an incredible amount of really fantastic work, which is where art is being used to bring about education, and raising of awareness or consciousness, empowerment, community building, and emancipation. So organisations like Geese Theatre, one of many who work in the criminal justice system, are changing lives in very powerful and meaningful ways. But there are countless. Radio for Peace Building in Place of War that I showed an image of earlier. Afro Reggae in Rio de Janeiro. Thousands more doing life-changing, extraordinary work. And that work remains very important, but it also has some dilemmas about who decides that a change is necessary. In whose terms is it? When is that change achieved? And why is art any good as a means of changing anything anyway? Those questions come up for me. The third intention, which is the one that I have been most engaged with, I suppose, over the years, is cultural democracy. And this was what many of the community artists originally wanted to achieve in creating work with people. Their intention was not to give people access to an existing cultural offer, nor to address social problems directly. For them, what they wanted to do was to enable people to create art of their own. This is an image from Untitled Arts, a group I've known for several years. It's come out of their work with older people, and their work with older people has led to a performance group, and this is a piece that they did this year. The three performers, who are all non-professional artists, who take up place in their night clothes, in a bed, on a high street, and talk and perform for passers-by. It's a very risky thing in all kinds of ways, but actually it is remarkable, and it is, for me, it represents this intention of cultural democracy in the sense that it is enabling people who experience loneliness, isolation, the sense of not being valued by society, to talk and perform about those experiences, because they're not talking about their own lives, they are performing theatre in a very complex, subtle way in the street. In all of this work, if there is a social benefit, it is incidental to what is happening, and there is a social benefit, but it is not because somebody has decided that social benefit should happen and is having an effect on other people. It just happens because we change and we grow. And the same is true, I think, of its political intention. It's an intention of empowerment, where the politics are not so much rhetorical and performative, but actually about changing people's lives, or in giving people the means to change their own lives. Now, I think I see these intentions as overlapping fields of work that make this big field of participatory arts. And somewhere in the middle of that is where there is the greatest amount of empowerment. But all of this is one big world. And what matters, I think, is thinking about where you stand. And bearing in mind that you might stand in different places at different times for different projects, that not everybody in the same project is standing in the same place in relation to those intentions, that people might have different intentions and reasons for being there, that people might be funding you or supporting you or in partnership with you for different reasons, and that actually during the course of the project you might change your position in relation to those outcomes, to those intentions. All of those are why I call this a restless art, because there is no comfortable place to stand here. It is replete with ambiguity. It is replete with ethical dilemmas, because it's always about relationship. It's always about me and another person. It's always about how do we do something together that no one knows what it will be, because until we come together, it's impossible to foresee what might happen. And that's for me, one of the tests of true co-creation. It's co-creation if you can't foresee what it's going to be when you enter the room, when you first begin the conversations that lead somewhere. I want to bring this to a close, first of all with a few questions that I ask myself. The first is, why do this at all? And at the core of this, this opens up many questions, but the core thing that I want to suggest to you to think about now is one of the problems, I think, with the way that a lot of this work is talked about when we talk about its social benefits, is actually we talk about people building new skills, people extending their networks, making new friendships, gaining confidence, all of these things that are completely true. But actually, they are the benefits of participation. They are not the benefits of participation in the arts, right? They are the same benefits if you participate in a five-a-side football team, if you join a church, if you join a voluntary group, if you join a charity. They are the benefits of social participation. So what are the benefits of art that make it a valid and, I would say, important addition to the ways in which we participate? We know that if you participate in a sports group, you will get fitter. You might also get some injuries. There are always downsides. But what are you going to get if you participate in a theatre group? And what are the downsides to that? How does that offer that we make appear to others? I'm getting used to thinking of myself as part of the liberal elite. I don't like it, but I accept that's how lots of people see me. And I think unless we can see ourselves as others see us, we're going to struggle to establish a relationship. We're going to struggle to hear what other people are saying. And we're also going to struggle with understanding how they think about what we're offering them. And that's because of some of the assumptions that are imbued in what we do. And the whole point about assumptions is we can't see them because they're what we think. They're so deeply what we think, like we assume art is good. Why do we assume art is good? Lots of people don't assume art is good. Lots of people don't even know what I mean when I say art. Probably most of you do. Most of us know what we mean by when we say art. If we go out on the street, we're going to get a much more complicated answer to that question. For me, the critical question, and it's become really urgent, as we just heard from the previous speaker, is, are we ready to change? We talk a lot about transforming lives, changing other people. Unless we are ready to change, in all kinds of ways that may be as difficult for us as it is for the people we're wanting to work with to change, then we're going to be here in 5 years' time having the same conversation that we had 5 years ago, and actually 35 years ago, truthfully. Because most of what has changed in the arts world, from my perspective, has not changed in the arts institutions. It has changed in people's hearts, in people's communities, and in the wider world. And there is a game of catch-up that urgently needs to happen. And what responsibilities does it bring if we talk about change? How do we know what change is good and what change is bad? What might threaten other people? There are all sorts of things to say about that, but I want to come to my close. So I'll just glide over the last two questions and just leave them with you to take away if you find them useful. This is another image from a great company in Portugal called Pel, who've been working for now 10 years in Porto, doing again extraordinary things. This is a project that was done over a year in the prison in Porto. They had a budget of €5,000 to do it. They did it because they wanted to do it, because they believe in what they are doing. For me, going back to this idea of where you stand, I stand with cultural democracy, and I want to explain why in the last few moments of this. I stand with cultural democracy because I believe that all human beings have equal rights, and those rights may in reality be denied or restricted, but in democratic states governed by the rule of law, the principle of equal citizenship must underpin all state policy, including arts policy. I read something on the train coming here, an interview with a Canadian philosopher called Charles Taylor, who said something that I really connected with. He talked about democracy having as its noble ideal inclusion, that is why we believe in democracy and why it matters, because we all want to be treated the same. We all want to believe that we are all included in this thing. Secondly, this matters to me, and this is part of the answer to why participation in art, not just participation, because art and culture have an irreplaceable value for all of us as a means of development, of sense-making, and of expression, for individuals and for groups. I wrote a paper some years ago called Parliament of Dreams. I see culture as our Parliament of Dreams, our alternative space in which we negotiate all the things that we either can't put into words, or we're afraid to put into words, or we don't know what we think until we've turned it into a painting or a piece of music, and enables us to connect one heart to another, one mind to another, and discover who we are. And unless that right is extended to everyone, then we are a liberal elite. We are only talking to ourselves. We are not listening to what other people's dreams are. And thirdly, because contrary to what we're often hearing at the moment, when one of the most frustrating things I hear is the phrase, "You lost, get over it," as if democracy was a once-in-a-lifetime or a once-in-5 years decision, a battle with winners and losers. It's not. It's a process. It's a constant negotiation between values, between ideas, between hopes, between dreams, between fears, between people. And that negotiation happens through art and culture. It happens all the time in ways that we can't imagine. This is one of my favourite projects, Ex-Church in Gainsborough. I think in the district of Gainsborough in Lincolnshire, where it is, I think it's something like the 100th poorest borough poorest area in the country out of 30-odd thousand super output areas. This is a group of people, all from that area, who have, with the artist, who you can see, who's the second person from the on that side that you can see. I can't tell my left from my right. They've taken over a church that the Church of England had abandoned and sold, and they've turned it into a very strange place that combines contemporary art with a mental health centre and a cafe, and they're doing it all with no money from anyone. And it is remarkable. I think unless we notice people like this, unless we work with people like this, unless we empower groups like this everywhere, then we are not going to find an answer to the huge changes that are happening to us. No one knows where the world is going since the Great Recession and all the things that have followed it since 2008. These are dangerous times, I think, and one of the dangers is not to recognise that. But art is really central to how we might respond to these dangerous times. Art remains one of our best ways of understanding ourselves and our experience, of expressing our feelings, sharing our hopes, dreams, fears, terrors. A way of finding common ground, empathy, of imagining other ways of being, of making sense, of listening to other people, especially the people we don't want to listen to. We need all those capacities now, and partly thanks to the social and technological changes of the last half century, and thanks to that history of the development of democratization and participation in the arts. They are more accessible to more of us than in the past. Participatory arts is one of the doors that open on this resource of art. And it is contested. We don't agree what it means or what it's for. We don't agree what's good about it or how much money should be spent on it or whether we should prioritize it compared to other things. It doesn't matter. Because it's in answering all those difficult questions, all those challenging, we might answer other bigger ones about the life we want to live. In uncertain times, we have to learn to live with ambiguity. At a time when everybody is telling us that the world is simple and all you have to do is this or all you have to do is that, we need the arts to tell us that actually the world is a very complex place and we're all different and we all have a voice in that. And participatory arts is one of the ways of making that happen. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that inspiring and challenging? Fantastic, thank you. So thrilling to be given examples from all over the world, to be reconnected with a whole world of practice and hope and aspiration and challenge. Nothing narrow or small or parochial about it. Like all our lives are so connected. Thank you, François. And an amazing combination of challenge, particularly those of us squirming in our seats as the liberal elite. An amazing combination of challenge and the embrace of difficulty, the embrace of ambiguity, tension, change, ethical dilemma, learning as we do it, changing as we go along, not stuck in some particular tub-thumping position, but saying, where am I in this? How can I learn? What are other people telling me? It's a fantastic combination that you bring to us, and we are deeply grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed.